Think back to 5th grade and the things that you remember about this coordinate graph. Some of the things might come to mind is you have an x-axis and a y-axis. They're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see that they're all positive. You should also remember that when I labeled coordinates, it went x and then y. Lots of you may have different ways to remember. How I remember it is you have to walk across the floor to get to the elevator before you can go up and down the elevator. So you have to walk in the building before you can go up and down the building. Multiple ways to kind of remember how that goes. Now this year, you're gonna see the graph that's on the right. So I want you to take about 10 or 15 seconds, talk to your elbow partner, and talk about things that you notice about the graph on the right compared to the one on the left from last year, and what are some things that you wonder. So take about 10 seconds. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. So some of the things that I noticed is it still had an x and a y axis. The one on the left now had negative numbers. But also something else I noticed, this graph right here is literally this section right here. So now instead of having one section of the graph, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 sections of the graph. So last year, the graph that you saw was just a piece of the coordinate plane, where this year we're going to talk about the whole thing. Now, one other thing that I noticed is that this graph on the right kind of reminds me of world cultures. So if you think about a globe, this is your latitude or your equator, and this one here is your longitude, or you can say your prime meridian. So when you're reading longitude and latitude coordinates on a globe or on a map in world cultures, you're really just using an x and y coordinate that is the same thing in math. So just something you can kind of see how math is also in world cultures, which y'all have seen some things like that on your warm-up recently. Now, if you look at the yellow paper that you should have glued into your notebook, we're going to label all the pieces of this graph. So make sure you pay attention and you get it labeled. Now, the first piece of information we're going to label are the x and y coordinates. Your x is always the horizontal one, and your y is always the vertical one. So make sure you have that labeled. Also, from last year, you should know that the middle where x and y meet is called the origin, and that is 0.00. Now, something new is called quadrants. Now, just like you see quadrant, Q-U-A-D, if I talk quadrilateral, it means I have 4 sides. Quarter, the Q-U-A, 4 quarters and a dollar. Coordinate, okay, a coordinate plane right here, 4 pieces. So quadrant, Q-U-A, means 4. Now, this quadrant or this coordinate plane is broken up into 4 quadrants. 1, and we write it using Roman numerals. 2, now if you want to write 1, 2, and then 3, 4, you may do that as well. But typically you see it written as Roman numerals. Now, if you look to the left of the screen, you see where it says follow the direction of the C. As you draw it, it labels the quadrants. So what that means is if I start right here and I draw a C, Well, the C is literally the direction the quadrants are being labeled. So here is 1. As I go around, there's 2. Keep going, well, there's 3. And if I keep going, well, there's quadrant 4. So if I draw a C on the coordinate plane, it is labeling the quadrants for me in the correct order. Now, if I look at each coordinate or each quadrant, and I look here and I look at my X values and my Y values, you're going to notice that the X values and the Y values are both positive. So in the box, label X, Y. In quadrant 2, you're going to notice the X values are negative, which is why it says negative X, and the Y values are positive, which is why it just says Y, or I could say positive Y if I really wanted to. And the same thing with 3 and 4. Quadrant 3, X's are negative, Y's are negative, which is why it's negative X, negative Y. And in quadrant 4, X's are positive and Y's are negative. Now, I label that because it's very important, because if I said what quadrant is negative 2, 3 located in, I don't have to go plot that point. All I have to pay attention to is that it's a negative and a positive 3, negative 2, positive 3. Well, negative positive is right here, so I know it's in quadrant 2. Now, if I wanted to go plot it, I could, and right there would be that point. However, you do not have to, just because we can pay attention to positive negatives. Now, if you look in your, on the other half of the yellow sheet, we're going to go through some examples together. So number 1 says plot these points on the graph below and label the letter. So remember, we go always X, then Y, which means I go left and right, and then positive, negative, or up and down. So right is positive, left is negative, up is positive, down is negative. So 3, 2. Always start at the origin, go to the right, 3 jumps, 1, 2, 3, and then you go up 2, 1, 2, put your dot and label it W. Now, when I use coordinate planes, for me, it's very, very helpful to use different colors. So what I mean is, for example, if I were to try to find 3, 2, one other method I could use if you struggle with graphing is find 3 on my x-axis and 2 on my y-axis. So here's 3 on my x, and here's 2 on my y, and wherever they cross, put a dot, and there's W. Now, if you choose to do it that way, which is fine, make sure you change colors for the next one. So X, or point X, so my X and then Y. So my x-axis, I am going to find -6, which is right here, and I'm gonna draw a line. Hopefully you draw a better line than I am. And -7 on my y, which is way down here, and draw a line. And where they meet is your x coordinate. Now, as you can see, doing it this method is really making the graph look a little messy. So just be careful whenever you do that. Try not to get it too messy, or use a pencil and erase if you need to, however you need to do it. So let's look at this one. So on my x-axis, I'm gonna find 0, which is right here. I'm gonna draw a line through my x-axis. And then my y-axis, -4, which is down here. So I'm gonna draw a line through that. So point Y should be right here. And if you don't like drawing lines, we can go back to counting. Remember X and then Y, so left and right, and then up and down. So I'm gonna go to the right 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then down 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and put my dot, and there is Z. So make sure you have those 4 points graphed on your grid. Now, if I look at point A, it wants to know what's the coordinate for point A. This is where really drawing those lines, I feel, with different colors come in extra handy. So here's what I would do. Draw a line down to your x-axis, and where does it touch? Touches at -6. And then draw a line over to your y-axis, and where does it touch? At 6. And then it asks, well, what quadrant is it in? Well, remember, this is quadrant 1, 2, 3, and then 4. It's in quadrant 2, so I'm gonna circle that. A is not on the X or Y axis, so I'm not gonna worry about that one. Now pay attention to this carefully, what I'm doing right now, because this is part of your math homework, exactly like this little table that I'm filling out. So make sure you're paying attention. B is way over here on the bottom right. Draw a line up to your x-axis, it's at 7. Draw a line over to your y-axis, it's at -6. And it's in quadrant 4, not on an axis, so I'm gonna cross that off. Okay, I'm gonna look at C. C is right here, so I'm gonna draw a line over to my y-axis, or I'm sorry, at my x-axis, or it's on 0, I guess you could say. Or my x-axis is over here at -5, excuse me. So it's right here at -5 on my x. But if I draw a line over to my y-axis, it's right here at the origin, which is 0. Now, if it's on an x or y axis, it is not inside a quadrant. So again, I'll repeat that. If it is on an x or y axis, that means it is not inside a quadrant. So quadrant doesn't matter on this one. This is where I use the axis one. Is it on the x-axis or the y-axis? It's on the x, so circle the x. Now, I want you to take the next minute or so. So I want you to pause this video right here. And I want you to take the next minute or so and fill out D, E, and F. So pause the video, and as soon as about a minute passes, resume play. So at this point, you should have had time to fill out D, E, and F. So take about 10 or 15 seconds, check your answers, see if they match your paper. If they don't, make sure that you correct it, please. All right, moving on to the next one. It says the line travels through 3 quadrants on the graph. Which quadrant does the line not go through? So this is where if I draw my C, this is 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it should be really easy to see that this line right here crosses through quadrant 1, 2, and 4. So it does not cross quadrant C. Now, number 4 says which of the following best represents a point that lies on the line. So we said it is not in quadrant C, which are negative x's and negative y's. So therefore, D cannot be it because that's a negative, and we said it was not in quadrant 3. So that's where knowing positive negatives on here really pays off because you're able to eliminate choices. So now quickly let's check. A, so remember that's my x and that's my y. So I go over 1, up 0, which is really close, but it's just underneath. So that's not it. B, 6, negative 7, 6, the negative 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's not it. And just to make sure, let's check C. 10, so I'm gonna come way over here to 10, and then negative 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So make sure you get in the habit of checking all your choices, just in case you did one backwards, or maybe you just miscounted. So double check them all, just in case you messed up. And the last question, it says, which point is inside the rectangle, outside the circle, and in quadrant 3? So this is where it gets really tricky. So it says, which point is inside this rectangle, let's shade in that rectangle, but then it said outside of the circle. So right here it said outside of the circle. So I'm going to erase everything that's inside this circle. So once in the rectangle, outside the circle, but then it said in quadrant 3. So remember, here's my C, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it wants in quadrant 3, so I have to erase everything that's not in quadrant 3. So I'm literally looking at just the yellow shaded area that you see. Now quadrant 3, remember those values are negative x, negative y. So that's a negative negative, that's not a negative negative, that's not a negative and then a negative, negative negative. So right now I only have to check 2 answers. So if I go to negative 1, which is right here, and then negative 2, so 1, 2, that's really kind of hard to see, so I'm going to erase it. So I know those 2 are out. Negative 1 and then 1, 2 is right here. And then if I look at D, negative 1, then 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, be careful of the wording. It said outside of the circle. Notice that this point right here is on the circle, where this point is outside the circle. So it's important that you pay attention to those words. So which one is it, A or D? Good, it should be D. Now at this point, the homework that you should be getting passed out to you, make sure you work on it, get it finished. Again, it's exactly like the yellow page that you have in your book right now. You have the graph at the top, or the chart at the top, fill in the coordinates, circle which quadrant or which axis the point is on. And then you have 2 questions very similar to the ones we just completed. If you have any questions, make sure you ask your teacher. What's not done is homework tonight, so make sure you're working and getting it completed.